Morning, everyone. So my name is Markham. I'm managing editor of Storyful. For those of you who aren't familiar with Storyful, it's an unusual company where we provide journalism as a service. We're 30 strong. I was the 5th person in the door, and we work with Reuters, with the New York Times, with ABC, clients of that caliber in the media. And we're their eyes and ears in social media. So we're trying to help them find all this content that exists that they were once very afraid of using. They didn't want to use it for copyright reasons. They were afraid that it wasn't valid, that it hadn't been verified. And we do that work on their behalf. And we've built a team around the processes that are involved in doing that. And one of the core messages or mantras, if you like, in Storyful is we pull the news from the noise. And it's been the biggest challenge for us has been, how do you go about monitoring the entire world's activity on social media all the time, in real time, and then delivering that in a way that our clients can use it, and they can use it to make it, to make very good news, make compelling content. And we sat about, when we started with Storyful, sitting down and just looking at what we had, what was available to us. And it's a huge shift in how you think about journalism. I come from newspaper journalism. I worked in Metro in Dublin. I worked for the broadsheets here. I worked in Australia editing a small community newspaper for a year. I worked in manufacturing, ran an embroidery factory just before Storyful, which is a bit of a digression, but quite good when you're going into a startup environment to get some, to be chucked into a manufacturing business at the start of a recession. You learn things very quickly. But we had to basically redefine journalism and how you think about it. And I'll get onto people later, which is something that Royston touched on, but when you're trying to find the people who can do this kind of thing, it's very hard, because no one who's come in the door in Storyful has gone, oh, I get that, yeah, I've done that before. It's a completely different way of thinking. And it's because you're just dealing with so much content all the time, and it becomes a job of monitoring, filtering, and thinking about content and thinking about stories as basically streams of data. So YouTube is a stream of data, Facebook is a stream of data, Twitter is an enormous stream of data. And that's what we're trying to manage. You're trying to manage these flows of information and weave stories out of them and apply old school journalism in very new ways. And it's not easy. So Nassim Taleb, you may know of, it's a good quote of his, I think, big data means more information but more false information. We spend probably about 60% of our time debunking stuff. So we're not looking for a good piece of video. You're actually looking for reasons why that piece of video shouldn't go out to a client or should be stopped in its tracks. The power of social media is that stuff gets spread very quickly, but because it's so unmediated and the people who generally are at the controls aren't professionals, they just share, and they share indiscriminately. Our job is to slow that process down a bit and try and figure out where the good stuff is and what should actually get through. We started looking at this. We started looking at the volume and the way the volume is increasing, and we've built the company around trying to deal with that. And the numbers are hard to grasp. So YouTube is something that we live in, day out. We're providing video content for TV stations, and we're constantly searching for the best bit of video. When I put this next graphic up when I put it together, I was trying to visualize the concept of how much there was and how much we have to deal with. So at that time, there was 72 hours of YouTube video uploaded every minute. So that's 3 days worth of video every single minute. And it's kind of hard to get your head around how much you actually have to sift. And one thing I think most people here might be able to understand is the feeling of taking a VHS cassette, putting it into the machine, and watching a 2-hour film. So if you were to take all the YouTube video that gets uploaded in a single day and put it onto VHS cassettes, this is what it would look like. So imagine trying to sift all through that to find the good 30 seconds of news that Sky News are going to loop all day for 24 hours, right? That's what we have to do every day. And along the way, we find a lot of cat videos. So, Royston talked about the unexpected revenue streams that you end up finding as a business. For us, that was cat videos. So we were chucking all this stuff away, saying this is getting in the way of the news, when in fact, people will pay for this, and websites will pay for that kind of stuff because it drives traffic, it drives ad clicks, and then we get a cut of that. So we now love cat videos at Storyful. It's a completely different element of the business. We don't really like to talk about it. It's a bit dirty, but hey, pays the bills. But when you're looking for this stuff, you can't go and search. And it was interesting to hear that stat about, do you go to a search site or do you go to a social site? And if you go looking for stuff in YouTube, the first thing you'll realize is, YouTube is so badly organized. And they're just now realizing this. They're trying to figure it out themselves. How do we make the good stuff more visible? But you can't go onto the platform and look for it. You can't go onto Google. You have to look for signals elsewhere. And that's what takes us into Twitter largely. It's real time, it's very concise, and it leads us to the content. Neil asked me to structure this talk about metadata. Metadata is very interesting for us. Every single piece of video or content has a huge number of markers that we can use. When it comes to a YouTube video, if you look in the URL, it's not something that people tend to look at, but if you look in the URL of a YouTube video, you'll get the youtube.com//watch?v equals. After the equals, you get a code. That is probably the single most useful thing that YouTube provides us. They don't give us much else. But we can use that to track the history of a video as it moves through the internet, where it's shared, where it pops up. And we go to Twitter first. But Twitter is just as noisy. And this is what 30,000 Twitter accounts look like, just flowing, unmediated. It's kind of mesmerizing. It's utterly useless. But these are the ones that we monitor every day in Storyful, and this is how we find that's how we find the good stuff. But obviously we don't look at it like this. As journalists, we have to organize this, so we put it into lists. And then we watch the lists and we build technology around understanding the lists, how it ebbs, how it flows, the velocity of them, how they change. And that sends us then the signal. The list will talk to us and say, something's changed about the list right now, you need to look at it. We get a pointer, that leads us to the content, and then we start to go to work on the content. So obviously, as a journalist coming in the door, this is not the way you think. You're used to going out and getting a story. And I've been going back to look at journalism syllabus in colleges. The first thing that I was never asked was, where are you going to find your stories as a journalist? It was never going to be in data like this, but now it is. So we find a tweet, we find something that's our signal, that helps us navigate through the noise. The next thing to do is understand, well, is that actually a valid signal? In terms of metadata, it's been a really good week for metadata. I've spoken to a couple of people who said to me, I never knew what metadata was until this week. And that's because of the NSA revelations that have come out. And there's so much stuff around the content. If you look at Obama and all the stuff he's been defending, what he's been saying is, we're not looking at your content. We don't want to hear your phone call. We just want the metadata around it, because that can tell us much more about the behavior. And if we need to, we'll look into your content. And without setting us up as the evildoers, we're doing that every day. That's exactly what we do. So this was a conversation going on around the NSA stuff that had come out. And a really good example of this is this tweet that was it was April 23rd, not too far ago. So the Associated Press, obviously a very reputable news organization, a lot of people take their pointers from what they do. This was fake. This is a famously fake message. It went out on the official account. It was because of a hacking or a phishing attack by the Syrian Electronic Army. Pro-Assad guys just wanted to disrupt things because they are fed up of how the rebels are getting the upper hand in media. For us, as journalists, we just know this is not right? Okay, so the first thing is breaking. Breaking should be in all caps. That's their style. They'd never really say, and Barack Obama is injured. It just doesn't sound very good. It's not very AP. Most of the journalists who saw this, you can see a couple of them at the bottom, wait, what the fuck, has to be hacked. People just understand immediately, not true. But there's other reasons, there's other ways that you can spot this if you know what to look for. Now, this had a huge impact. So this is the Dow Jones. It's, I think, $139 billion worth of value disappeared. That's more than 60% of Ireland's GDP gone in the blink of an eye because of a fake tweet. The reason this happened is this is all robo-trades. This is all high-frequency trading off the back of keywords. They analyze signals. They look for keywords. They probably don't look at the right metadata. And if they knew what they were looking for, this wouldn't have happened. The AP tweet had a couple of pointers that a good journalist, and who here is, can I just see a show of hands, who has gone onto BuzzFeed ever in your meeting? So there's a couple of people. BuzzFeed, probably not the most respected for really salient punching journalism. A lot of their guys are just, it's just lists, they call them listicles, which is 20 reasons why Superman is Jesus, you know, that kind of thing. This guy's from BuzzFeed, his name is Samir. The AP tweet was via web. Most of their tweets appear to come from Socialflow. So if you go back to the one I showed a little while back from Martin Robbins, he was saying there's maybe a dozen items of metadata that you can get from a single tweet. There's actually more. There's probably, in a good full tweet, there's maybe 24 or 30 different pointers you can look at. And one of them is this one circled in red. So if you're looking on TweetDeck, it will tell you how the person has put that message out, what they've used. Have they used TweetDeck? Have they used Echophone? Have they just put it in through the web? And in this case, the AP tweet, the fake one, had been input via web. That's not what the AP do. The AP use Socialflow. And in all their tweets, this is a more recent one, and it's valid. Obviously, you can see all caps again breaking. They use Socialflow. And to use the web is an aberrant behavior. And that should have been a flag to the robo-traders. But of course, they weren't looking for that. But the journalists were. It's one of the first things you look for. You look for the history of behavior on an account. And that's kind of become our instinct. So when this thing, you know, the first thing that Storyful did when that tweet went out was start advising our clients, don't use it, it's fake. Don't use it, it's fake. Same thing happened yesterday. Glenn Greenwald is the guy who broke the NSA story for The Guardian. And the focus has been over the last couple of days, where is the whistleblower Edward Snowden? This is the guy who worked for the CIA, who leaked all the data. He's in Hong Kong. Greenwald is the only person who's, well, apart from maybe 2 or 3 others, who's spoken to him, who knows where he is. There's been a fake account, absolutely perfect. It's the same avatar, it's the same background, it's the same tone. It's got Glenn, everything is copied. The name is @GGreenWild. And you wouldn't believe how many people were caught by that. We spotted it again. It just didn't feel right to us. He was saying that Edward Snowden was dead, had been killed in a drone attack in Hong Kong. Reuters journalists were sharing this, going, look at this is amazing, God, it's completely fake. So that's Twitter. I mean, and for us, Twitter is just, it is an incredible tool. It's been denigrated. A lot of people say, God, Twitter is sharing all this rubbish. It's not. It's people on Twitter. As long as you start segmenting it, understanding all the different things that it can tell you, it's an incredible way of finding signal. YouTube, on the other hand, is not. Now, there's a really good article that I would urge you to read. It's called How Facebook Designed the Perfect Empty Vessel. Facebook is probably the most amazing gatherer of information about anyone. It just behooves you to fill in more details about yourself. Every design iteration they do on the front is a way of getting more data out of you. It's just natural. It feels good to help Facebook know more about you. We would love YouTube to do the same for metadata, because when you put a video up, there's nothing to prompt you to geotag that or to let us know more about it. So we've had to completely reverse engineer how we go about interrogating content on YouTube. This video, which you'll be glad to know I'm not going to run through, I'm just going to show a graphic, emerged last year. It was of a beheading. These 2 guys felt the rough edge of that chainsaw. And it was being shared as being from a Syrian, it was a Syrian army. They claimed it was a Syrian army guy beheading these 2 rebels. And you could hear screaming in Arabic and all the usual traits of a video, except obviously the chainsaw. The chainsaw was new to us. We hadn't seen that before. We'd seen beheadings. We hadn't seen a chainsaw. So we were skeptical of that. We were skeptical of that slightly strange behavior. And we started searching YouTube in a range of different ways. One of the things we'll do is we'll look for the word chainsaw. We'll just search randomly for chainsaw, see if that turns up anything. It didn't. We converted the title in Arabic. We'll convert that a couple of times back and forth to search. That might help us. This time it didn't. One of the decent pieces of metadata that YouTube gives you is a thumbnail. It's not something most people think about because it comes up in that grid. It gives you a hint at what the content is going to be. But it's really useful to us, because if you right-click, if you go into things a bit more in more detail, you've got a plugin. You'll see I've got a whole range of plugins here on my browser. It's Chrome. One of them is that you can use Google to search with an image. So you just take an image or you click on an image, and you can just run that backwards through Google. And this helps us tunnel backwards through time on the internet. If that thumbnail is cropped up somewhere before, it means the video is cropped up somewhere before. This video was from Mexico. It was shot in 2004. It was a drug war video. The guys in Syria had overdubbed it perfectly with Arabic. It was absolutely seamless. The chainsaw sounds were in the background. They'd done everything that they could to make it seem like it was the Syrian army. You know, Mexicans actually look quite like Syrians when there is kind of videos, same sort of skin color. There was the army fatigues, and it had all the same traits. But clever use of some unexpected metadata led us to find that this wasn't what it purported to be. And it's often the unexpected use, and when it comes to training our journalists, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, listen, you have all these things. These are all the bits of information you have available to you. You now have to learn how to figure out which one to go to in any circumstance that's going to tell you the most about this piece of content. This is just a photo I took. This is one of paragliders off Killiney Hill. I have it uploaded to Flickr. Flickr is an interesting place for us. So we don't tend to do much with stills, but it can be really good for corroboration of locations. But every now and then we'll be chasing a particular image that's important to us for some reason. But we need to know that it's valid. We need to know that the person who shot it or says they shot it actually did. And that can be quite tricky. Every photo that you put online, not a lot of people know it, has this stuff called EXIF data embedded in it. And the EXIF data tells us a lot about your behavior as a photographer. Flickr is really good for that. It gives us maybe 40 different points. I can know when I go into Flickr what kind of camera you use. I can know what direction you held it. Did you tilt it up? Because there's an accelerometer in your camera, so I can know if you held it that way. I can know the lens. All these things tell me a little bit about the behavior of the photographer. And I can go then and I can interrogate the person. I can find the person who shot it and say, listen, tell me what kind of camera you have. What did you shoot that on? If things match up, I know it's a valid photo. I can then go and use that. It also means that you can build up a track history of someone. You can see what kind of content you're likely to get out of them, etc. And you can just interrogate that over time. We spoke a lot about this at dinner last night. This presents huge opportunities for anyone who's dealing in content to just think about all the data that you can possibly pull and how you can use that. We were talking last night about, I don't know if anyone's used Strava, the app for cycling. Cycling's got obviously huge at the moment. But all the metadata that comes out of that is hugely valuable. And for us as a journalist, anything like that can be useful. We can find weather behavior on a particular day through a search engine called Wolfram Alpha that we can use then to run against a video to verify the location. We can use shadows in Google Maps to verify where something was shot and at what time of day, and that will help us verify a video. So for our journalists, it's literally that. It's training them how to think slightly differently. You also have to be quite careful. And one crowd who were famously not very careful were these guys, Vice. Vice are very up and coming in the States. They're expected to sell for quite a bit in the next while, but they've built their reputation off unusual content from unusual places. The story here was they were following John McAfee, the guy who made his name making virus software. He was under suspicion of killing his neighbor. He was hiding out in, I think it was Guatemala, and this was the braggarts Vice. We're with John McAfee right now. No one else could find him. Unfortunately for Vice, they left the EXIF data in this photo, giving the exact lat long of where they were, which wasn't the best for John McAfee. They then claimed that they had falsified the EXIF data, but really they then just scooted off. But an interesting use, and this is the kind of thing that we have to reverse think some of these things. We often find material that we can't use or shouldn't use. The Boston bombings was a very good example. We had discussions going on online which made it into the mainstream media of who was responsible. There was a name, Anish Kapoor, I think. He was an Indian student that went missing in Newport, Rhode Island. And this was before we knew who the Tsarnaev brothers were, the two bombers who planted the bombs at the bars at the Boston Marathon. But a name was bubbled up through Reddit. People were doing online sleuthing. They were doing amateur sleuthing. That came into our hands. Within 5 minutes of finding this guy's name, I had his father's home phone number in my hand. And that was through photos, through online profiles. We were able to just track our way back through the internet and find this person in a very short space of time. So a lot of the time, that information, we have to be then responsible. Do I put that out? Do I allow 100 media organizations chase this guy down and ask him questions? It wasn't verified in that case, so we didn't. And to bring it all back about metadata and how powerful it is, there was a very interesting piece done by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This is the quote about why you should be worried about the metadata that the NSA have on you. They don't know what you said, they don't know the call that you made, but they can have a pretty good idea. Other examples they gave were, they don't know what you said in the phone call, but they know that you called Samaritans from the center of the Golden Gate Bridge at 2 in the morning and then went home. Or they know that you received a call from an NRA guy and then proceeded to make 3 or 4 phone calls to your senators or or the House of Representatives, whoever represents you. They don't know the contents of those conversations. They will remain secret, but they can guess. So the next section is more about what do we have to get our guys to do? And this is, for any organization that's working in content and that's working in the digital space, I think you need to start thinking for all your people, it can't come from the top down. It has to be ingrained in everyone that this digital kind of language matters. You have to be able to speak it. It has to be your first language. And it's hard to hire for. It's very hard to build a team because these aren't skills that are out there generally. You need to have a sense of this person has done this. They've run their own website. They know how to manipulate code. They're probably going to be able to grasp this stuff quite quickly. If you're looking for coders, it's slightly different. But I would argue that I think if you present a journalist with this, they need to know that this is valuable. And this is actually story. This is more valuable, potentially, than going out and walking the streets. So what is this? This is a stream from the Idaho election primaries that we pulled from Twitter. It was using a thing called Data Sift, and it was a real-time stream that we were watching. And it's a spreadsheet, so it's god-awful. No journalist in their right mind really wants to have to work with spreadsheets, but all these things are pointers for us, and what we were trying to do was identify people who were at a polling station and had a camera phone, basically. So we started running these scripts, and we started, pulling people out of these, and you could see literally a pattern. One person would go, heading off to the polls now, going to cast my vote. Then they'd go, nearly at the polling station, here's an Instagram photo, and we can then go, hey, see you have a photo there, would you mind taking some video of what's going on at the polling station? And we had a strike rate of maybe 10%, but that's a vast amount of content that we just wouldn't have had. So you can do these kind of things for free, cheaply. It just takes a little bit of a stretch of imagination. Your journalists need to know, they're going to need to know a hell of a lot more acronyms. They're going to need to know that. I got an email while I was sitting here from one of our clients going, listen, we need to map these 2 regions. It's a really hot topic for us. We want to see how the content correlates from one territory and another that border each other. And we're just wondering, we know you guys have a lot of content. What can we do to map it? Well, a while back, we decided, wouldn't it be interesting if a client came to us with a problem where they needed a geographical feed? Let's start putting a lat long into our metadata, and then we can feed them out a KML stream, which is a geolocated XML, and they can then just chuck that into a map. So we were able to turn around in 2 minutes to this client and go, you know what, we actually have that, that's fine. We then have an upsell to our client, and we have a very happy customer, which is quite interesting. But at the start, we wouldn't have even thought about that, and most journalists probably wouldn't. But now,
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I don't know whether you can go there, but how do you then figure out what to price that at?
Well, obviously, we grossly inflate the amount of time we spend putting that together, and then we price according to the size of the company. I know it does depend. I mean, we've done these kind of projects quite a bit for Google. We've mapped elections, and we've helped them sift content from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Senegal. So it's something that we've a stock pricing model for.
Because the value will be different depending on, in terms of the client, the value can have very different meanings for the same piece of work from you. So I just wondered whether you can get into some really nice value-based piece around getting revenue for it. It can.
I mean, what I said before about the way that it's now journalism by data stream. So we're not building stories. Ironically, that's not what Storyful does. We don't build stories, but we provide people with the building blocks to do so. But you can apply that in a huge range of spheres. So there's plenty of companies that offer brand monitoring, brand tracking. We can do that in quite a different way. We can do it in a much deeper way. We've been working with a couple of financial companies about financial analysis, and I think the example of the ISEC there with the fake AP tweet shows that there's a huge amount of value in that. Also, when we track, so we build lists. I kind of keep going on about lists, but they're so valuable to us. If you build lists by sector and by people who tend to talk about one particular thing, we can pull the data off that, and you can then sell that as a valuable piece of data to that kind of person. So yeah, it changes depending on the client. For this particular client, it's quite a short time frame. It's purely for visualization for them, but yeah. So anyway, these are some of the tools that we use, and the tools that are becoming more and more valuable to journalists probably than their little black book. Journalism used to be about who you knew. It used to be about the contact base that you already had, and to some extent that's still very important for particular types of journalists. But for the most part, it's going to be how quickly can you find the most relevant person, and how quickly can you make contact with that person, establish bona fides, and extract what you need, extract the information that you need. So these are the kind of tools that do it, and Sift and Datamine are competitors. They're basically ways of mining Twitter, of taking that fire hose of 400 million tweets a day times maybe 30 data points per tweet is whatever you have, 1.3 billion or 1.2 billion data points that you can then filter, sift, analyze, and segment, which is massive. There's other ones as well, and the interesting thing is the far end of how things inform what you do. So we get this feedback loop from our analytics. We use a combination of nearly all of these: Google Analytics, Facebook, Mixpanel, Chartbeat, that tell us how we're going to find stuff, how we're going to use stuff. So we've been following YouTube constantly, and we are now in the rights management business. We help that one-off upload of the person who captured a lightning strike or a tornado or cat getting flushed down the toilet, wherever it might be. We help them monetize that and get that out. And we know that that video has to get onto the right platform. There was a part in your presentation, Oystein, you were talking about understanding where things are going to get found, and particularly the social search thing was interesting to me. YouTube doesn't get found on YouTube. 90% of the hits on a video will come from embeds, which means someone has taken that video, they've found it, and they've extracted it out and put it somewhere else that they know people will actually see it, because they won't find it in the haystack. They'll find it when they put it somewhere else. So we know that the business is trying to get the good video, put it somewhere where a lot of people are going to see it, and then following the analytics to get more information about where else we need to place it. So that's what we're doing with the rights management business. And then Chartbeat, everything. This is how journalists are now tailoring their content. One person I mentioned before was Alexis Madrigal. He writes for The Atlantic. And he started investigating dark social. He went looking for the sources of his readers. He went trying to understand his readers to shape the content better. And what he found was he was optimizing stuff for Facebook. He was optimizing stuff for readers that come from social media. I think it was 65% of his readers was dark social. It was actually people who were getting the content from an email referral, or they were getting it through IM. It wasn't coming through the hugely buzzy zeitgeisty channels. It was the valuable content that was being shared otherwise. People going, you need to see this, here, have a look. So that dark social told him a lot about his strategy. It informed what he was going to do next. He wasn't going to concentrate on optimizing for social. He was optimizing on just really good content. So that's us in a nutshell, and that's what we do. I'd love to hear any questions that you might have about how what we do can help you guys inform your content strategy better, or simply just understand the options that are available to you in the social web. So if you have any questions, please fire away. Yes?
Yeah, hi. I'm curious to know what challenges you've had around rights clearance, and what kind of strategy Storyful has around.
So rights clearance has been, I think we can segment it in a couple of different ways. So news content, the way we deliver it first to clients is we do it a couple of different ways. We mark it as either cleared public content, which is stuff that's in the public domain, or else it's from activists that have just put it out there solely to get it broadcast. And then there's all the other different areas. There's the light stuff that people want to use for commercial players, etc. It's a huge challenge. So we don't chase stuff that is rights managed. We're not going to go after a band's video. We're not going to go after brand's video. We're going after the one-offs. We're going after the small amateur content creator. And because, to go back to YouTube's failings, because there's no really good helpful UI in YouTube to encourage the uploader to signal their rights management preference or to signal anything else, really. We have a huge job of education to do every time we reach an uploader. And that's fairly taxing. That's quite work intensive. We've tried to shrink our processes down as much as we can in that area. So we have multiple translations of our approach messages to people, etc. We've tried to make the process of the legal documents all really seamless. So if we can get the person and they understand it, it's maybe a 5-minute process to get them signed up. And then we start asking them, right, how many different areas do you want to segment this to? And hopefully Royston will give us a nice discount on some of the rights management software they were talking about. But it's taxing, it's very difficult. And it's not something that, I don't think we anticipated at the start, as a small startup, how much of this we were going to end up doing. Because the goal for Storyful in the beginning was news. It was very much serving the news customer, whereas this has become, this is what they want, this is the revenue, this is effectively their classified advertising now, it's ads over video. So we have to do it more and more. Does that answer your question, or is it?
But I presume there may be times when you ultimately have to take a risk because you've got something that's really important and you can't track the rights.
Yes and no. So historically, right, there's before Arab Spring and after Arab Spring, two very distinct times when it comes to user-generated content. Before the Arab Spring, no one wanted to use any of it because they were just terrified. The higher-ups, the legals, would say, don't touch it at all. And we got to a point midway through, I think, Egypt, where guys in Reuters were saying, well, actually, don't use any UGC unless Storyful has vetted it. And a lot of that stuff wouldn't be clear. That would be from activists. Some of it we would have been able to contact the original uploader. We found one guy in a hotel in Cairo when everything was kicking off, and he gave us rights. But a lot of the time with that kind of stuff, they're fine and they're happy for us to just say, listen, you can use this. But we won't take a punt if it's UGC stuff, if it's owned by someone that we can identify. And we had to caution a client yesterday who was using something that we hadn't fully cleared, and we've been clear about that, but they just got over enthusiastic and ran. You can't do that anymore, because as this education process goes on with the uploaders and with the owners of content, they understand more their own rights and they fight back. And a media organization can't afford that kind of bad PR. Yes?
Your ability to analyze in a large scale patterns, it's able you also to understand the source of contingent content? To go to the other side, like able to advise if you will publish a certain content, that can become in this pattern a contingent one, get a viral effect.
I'm not sure. Are you saying that?
Because you look at Twitter and you see, for example, a tweet, or you look at YouTube and you see a video that got a very strong viral effect.
Yes.
You are able to analyze the pattern itself, how it became viral.
Yeah, and that's quite important. So for us, the provenance of something and how it spread can be very informative to the client. And they want to know that. They want to know how we've established where this piece of content has come from. So we might find something that has a couple of hundred views on it, but we want to find the original share, and we want to find out the motivations of why this was shared. And a lot of the time that will tell us a lot about whether or not the content is valid. So Assyria is a really good example. A lot of our techniques were honed during the Arab Spring. You would find a piece of video and you would be trying to figure out where it bounced. So the Assyria was organized largely through Facebook groups, by town, they were called local coordination committees. And you would look for the very first share of a video, which will tell you where it's come from, its provenance. You're always kind of tunneling back through time to the original, the share of where it's sprung out from. Reddit has been very interesting to us because it's become much more influential about how videos go viral. So we have a system basically to prompt us when something starts to bubble up on Reddit, and then we'll go and have a look. And sometimes it'll be old content and sometimes it'll be scraped. But a lot of the time that might be all it takes for something to just take off, and we're right there at the start.
Can I ask you, Mark?
Neil, hey.
I'm fascinated just about how, as you said, the big media organisations can compete. And obviously you're helping them, but I always remember it was your colleague Mark telling me the story about when a bus crashed into a tram in Dublin. Yeah. And what was fascinating was the RTE, the the broadcaster didn't want to say who crashed into who because they get sued.
Yeah.
But you could find out 2 minutes afterwards on Twitter who did it, because whoever tweeted it, and it was actually ironically an Irish Times journalist who tweeted it out, but couldn't even report it in their own paper that happened, because the legal people were saying, Jesus, we'll have to wait till the inquest is over before we can say that that's happened. How do you see that panning out, or where broadcast news is just becoming more and more unreliable because it's just not unreliable, but it's just not up to speed with the other sources?
It's a constant debate. So the debate over first to have the information or first to be right, I think, is probably a good way of approaching that. And Boston was a very good example of that. Most of the journalists, so the CNN failed hugely in Boston. They had, they were parodied in the Daily Show for the way they covered it, where they had people on street corners, and it was an absolute mess. And you had better information being shared on Twitter, but largely because there was 80,000 people sitting online listening to the police scanner, which someone had pointed a webcam at the police scanner so they could hear everything that was going on live. And that's the same sort of thing, that you have this unmediated information, but it's not always. I mean, we talked about this last night at dinner. Is that of value? Is the stuff that's unverified of value? And certainly in the case of a Lewis crash, where someone saw it happen and they're a reasonably they're a measured individual that you can trust, then that's fine. That information should go out and should be shared. And I think that all the media organisations will gradually catch up. This has been borne out in a whole load of different ways. It's been borne out through how all the organizations approach their social media guidelines. The New York Times, I think, famously just said, just don't be a dick on Twitter. I mean, it's a really simple social media guideline, but it covers everything. Some people will write 4 or 5 pages of how to behave, and the New York Times just went, just be a good person. Like, don't be anything else than what you would be in real life. And I think that's a good way of looking at it, that the people who do that and the people who you learn to trust, you can trust. Yes, they'll make mistakes. So Anthony DeRosa, who's social media editor for Reuters, just recently left. He was one of the people caught out by Glenn Greenwald yesterday. And he went, Jesus, I'm sorry. He apologized publicly pretty soon after 1,000 people tweeted at him going, you idiot. That's wrong. It's funny, I have to give a presentation tomorrow in London about this and about the democratic effects of social media. And one of the things I'm pointing back to in that presentation is a Bible that was printed in 1631. And it was called the Wicked Bible. And it was called the Wicked Bible because they managed to get 1,000 of them off the press with "Thou shalt commit adultery." And at that stage, the printing press was something that was quite young and quite new. But obviously, they didn't stop printing. They just said, listen, we learn from this and we go forward and we print more so that we understand the environment and we understand what we're doing. And I think the same applies to social media. Is we're not going to stop everything just because one person makes a mistake. And we're not going to stop everything because the legals are slightly worried. You just have to learn to adapt and learn what's right and what's not in the context of where we are. Does that, I think, yeah?
I was just wondering, from an organisational point of view for Storyful,
Yeah.
have you found yourself in a position, or do you have checks in place where you find something out with all of your leads and your analytics, and you find something out about a client? I would be worried, or I suppose wary for you as an organisation, that you're a news shaper now, effectively, and you're a channel that news comes through, and you have journalistic checks in place for that. So, for instance, if a big client is paying you to collect news for them or to collect metadata, and you find out something about that client, do you have checks in place for that?
Can I ask you to be a bit more specific about it? Give me an example of...
I'm just, you have a huge responsibility here to shape the news, and going back in time and checking news and say, I suppose it's just, I haven't even formed the question yet, but I suppose if CNN is one of your clients and they pay you to collect news, and some of the news you collect isn't very palatable to some of the investors in CNN.
Well, do
you check that, or do you leave it up to the client to filter it?
We're kind of in a luxurious position. So Storyful, as you might appreciate as a member of the public, isn't massively public, so we don't put much news out there. We have our Twitter feed and we have our blog, etc. But largely it's a private channel from us to the clients. And we don't have the ability to publish anything directly onto any of our clients' sites. We're literally serving up building blocks to them. So what we will do is a lot of the time we'll say, listen, we've taken this 95% of the way. You have to make a decision on whether or not this content works for you. And that in that kind of situation, that's what we'd do. We would serve it up and say, we know this is going on. You use it if you want to. There's no obligation. It's not like we're feeding a direct channel, an output for them. They then take it and they do whatever they need to do with it. So we don't have to worry about that too much. It was interesting. There was something that happened a while back. It was, again, with Reuters. One of their guys, their social media editors, was indicted for hacking into the LA Times website and allowing other people to do the same. And it was, for us, it was an inflammatory thing because we knew he was a hacker and we knew that some of the people around him were hackers. So to report it kind of exposed us. And there was a lot of attacks going on at the same time of the type of, like the Syrian Electronic Army. So sometimes to protect ourselves, we will slow things down and not report them because we just know that it puts us at risk. But there'll be back-channel conversations going on a lot of the time with other clients. So it might not be through our official channels, but we'll be talking to them on Skype or GChat or just down the phone or via email saying, you should be aware of this. You're not going to see it here, but we're advising you in such and such a way.
Hi, Michael Walsh. I do a lot of stuff with the research and development side of things in the BBC, and one of the projects that we work on is something that we're trying to commercialize, which is putting rights into the metadata so that it works just seamlessly and that you can get some content and pull it off the net and then add your own stuff to it, and then you can put it back up and more metadata gets added and then it can go and flow. But the problem with the whole internet thing is the clash between old business models and new business models, in that rights clearance all along has always been on geographical distributions. Yeah. And a lot of the media companies work on the basis, well, we clear for this, licensed area, but we won't clear for anywhere else, or we clear for one playout, we won't clear for repeats and all that. And that doesn't work in a digital environment. It just, it's completely false. But it's surreal in many respects in that once you go digital, you've effectively gone global. But to try and clear globally is a massive, massive problem because the interested parties that already exist, like a lot of the rights societies and stuff, don't want to do a global license because that's their business model gone then. Because a lot of the rights societies, geographical distribution is what keeps them alive and being able to preserve geographical distribution. So global licensing is a major problem. So how do you deal with issues where you have digital content that you really have to effectively globally license? But then added to that, you have people like, unfortunately, the BBC doing GeoIP, so that they have digital content that they try to restrict to do the analog model, whereby it says, well, we only clear this for UK distribution, but it's on the internet, which is a complete falsehood. So it's effectively, there's two things there. Like you've got the old business model saying you only clear rights for geographical distribution, but equally, I mean, once you've got digital content, how are you with clearing it, effectively giving somebody or getting a global license to clear it for people? Well,
the great thing about building a newsroom from scratch is that you can kind of ignore all the old rules, and we've kind of done that to some extent. And it could be arrogant of me to say, but I can't see the geographic licensing model surviving in perpetuity. It just can't. I know that it's a huge source of frustration globally, like that. I can't watch a video of, say, The Daily Show because I live here, which doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, that's just the way it is. But for us, it doesn't. We don't really pay any heed to geolocation. It's not a concern for us, and it's certainly not a concern for average punter who wants to sell his video. They know it's on YouTube. They know the whole world can see it. They want to get whatever benefit there is to accrue to them. They don't really care about GeoIP, and neither should they, I don't think. If it gets picked up by Indian station and the whole subcontinent is suddenly watching it through a commercial player and they're getting 30% of the revenue, that's great for them. They don't really care. And we can strike a deal on their behalf. Absolutely fabulous. So I can't see it lasting, really, is probably the answer to that. It just can't. It'll be washed away eventually.
No, but it's interesting. Sorry, it's interesting insofar as like you can clear it globally with the content producer effectively, but then like the distribution channel that somebody might pick it up on in terms of like if you take say the BBC and they put it up on their web, they might only want to clear it to the UK market. So would they come back to you and say, well, actually, we only want rights for the UK market, or do you just go, look, it's
for our model, it doesn't. I mean, they pay a monthly subscription, so it doesn't make a difference to us. I mean, for the stuff that gets cleared, that's all covered in the monthly subscription. Once they've ingested it, it's up to them and how it's used. As far as we're concerned, it's licensed globally. If BBC then wish to restrict it internally, that's up to them, up to you.
Hi. Second question. Do you do much automated processing to extract metadata from video? And what's the state of play in that area?
From video, no. We've done, most of our automation has been in discovery. So we're trying to shrink. The time-consuming stuff for us is finding the content. So that's where we've concentrated our process automation and trying to, the great thing about it is we have developers who sit right beside the journalists. So when the journalist comes up against something that's frustrating, they just turn their head and go, Paul, can you do something about this? And then we'll have a solution hopefully the same day, which is great. When it comes to the metadata stuff, we don't get a huge amount. I mean, 99% of the video that we surface is YouTube because that's where the content is. YouTube don't release a huge amount of that, unfortunately, and there just isn't that much.
I suppose what I mean is the algorithms which might process a video itself and pull out information about stuff that's in that video that says, okay, these are all the videos that are at nighttime, and then just tag nighttime in an automated fashion to all the videos that are at nighttime.
We haven't done that. I mean, it's something we could do, but it's not. We search in very unusual ways. We don't search in consistent ways. We'll build banks of search terms around events that happen, and they'll be quite local to that event. They may be in a couple of different languages, and there may be 4 or 5 search terms that we're using. So our search techniques don't really fit long-term algorithmic applications because it's not going to serve stuff up to us. And we have automated persistent searches for terms and for different kind of conditions, and you end up just sifting through more stuff. We are more reactionary than that, unfortunately, and we rely on the kind of signal. So we get more context and more metadata from someone describing a video in a tweet or on Reddit that's useful to us than we would from a video itself. So we're better placed to look in those areas to understand why a video is being picked up rather than understanding what the video is itself.
I'm just interested in something you said and something you alluded to earlier with regards to the skill sets required from a traditional journalist to a digital journalist. You mentioned there the journalists are sitting beside developers. Do you see the journalists coming out of the education system ready to enter into your world, or is there an additional skill set that they require?
Yes and no, I guess. The best journalists that we have in-house are people who come from a newspaper background, who are typically sub-editors, people who have done sub-editing. The reason they're good is that they're very pernickety. They tend to look for detail. They look for tiny, meticulous bits of detail, and that lends itself very well to the way we search and the way we look at stuff. And then the people who have done a bit of sub-editing but have also tinkered online. So our news editor, Malachi Brown, is Vincent Brown's nephew, but he comes from an IT background. So he bridges the gap. The colleges, the journalism courses in Ireland don't teach the kind of stuff that we need from journalists. But at the same time, the younger cadre of people that are coming in now, and we've just taken in a bunch of interns, they get it much more quickly because they're used to embedding stuff, and they're used to maybe playing with a blog or something else. It's just native to them. It's not something that they have to learn from scratch. They understand maybe how when they look at a web page, they can do Apple U and they can get into the controller console in Chrome and start going, oh, this makes sense because I can see that link or whatever. And that's how we tend to select people, is someone approaches us and we go, right, what's your experience? But then you look for them online. And if you can see that they've done stuff online, then they're going to be a fit. They're not the typical journalist. They're not the shorthand or photographer. They're a mix of skills. And once you get them in-house and once you get the right kind of person, you'll know very quickly if they're going to be able to grow within the company and grow into the other bits of skills, which are, how can I help the techies automate stuff? How can I, help Storyful build its capacity? And most of our journalists have done that already. They get it quite quickly, and then they expand into to fill the skill set.
Yeah, I'm just aware of time. There's been a question that you've been wanting to raise for quite a while at the back. Actually, maybe it's just me that can see you.
Sorry, up there.
Thank you. I think it's been actually raised and partly answered as well. But knowing the company from its very conception, it's interesting to see how it's evolved from being a news company and a curator of news to being almost an advanced and possibly niche data analytics, data mining type company. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, the first question is, how much of the sort of the curation and the management of the content is done from on a human level versus a technology level, tools versus human intervention? And then secondly, what is that doing to the profile of people you need to employ? I mean, do you still need to employ journalists all the time? And, or should it be economists and financial guys, etc.?
Well, okay, to answer the first question, I think I have answered that in part, in that the discovery is where we automate more stuff. The human element is very much the packaging, the packaging the input. And at times it does feel like data input jobs until you come to something that has to be verified in detail, at which point you're back into full journalism mode. You're investigating stuff, you're collaborating with people to build a really good picture. The more I think that we do down the content line in particular, the more it will become that we'll need people who have data entry skills and who have management skills and all that kind of stuff, or management of the inventory, if you like. The economists, I don't think so much. I think what we probably need are, there's a breed of journalists, like data journalists, who typically work with large streams of data. The guy we have on board at the moment is called Gavin Sheridan. He does a lot of freedom of information stuff in which he learned to deal with vast data sets, parse them down, find the interesting piece of information. And the way Gav thinks and the way people like him think is literally just give me huge amounts of data and I'll boil it down. And I'll find what we need to find and I'll understand the patterns, etc. That is going to become increasingly important. And you can see across the board, media organizations are hiring for that. They're hiring people who can take that information, find it, and do really interesting things with it. The Guardian are particularly good at it. They have a data blog, and they have a big visualization interactive team. I think pretty much every organization now, to be honest, does it to some extent. And it's because that's where the interesting stories are going to emerge from. We don't do as much of that right now as we'd like to do. I think the analytics stuff is probably going to come later. We're in a process of productizing a lot of our processes. Once we get that done, that will take a big burden off our journalists so they can focus on just the solely human stuff and then put their energies into other areas. So.
Great.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Just give me a round of applause.
Thank you.